Welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Jennifer and I will be having an affair with Djèlí Clark and his novella, Ring Shout, which I will show very quickly because I have two editions. I have this one, and I have a very special edition that I ordered that is also signed. Let me get that signature. Okay, it was signed by Mr. Clark himself. This was copy 125 of 500. Only 500
That is awesome.
copies are
Could
made.
you see? I love
There's
it.
exclusive art in here that shows some of the characters. Like this is Butcher Clyde. So sorry if you like this, guys, but you can't have it. It's no longer available.
Yeah, that's super special. Like that cements your place as a true fan when you have the signed special edition bonus material. I think that is really beautiful. I have, sadly, just an electronic copy, but it does have that really spooky red cover that you showed us the first time. And man, it was a lot, Joey. So do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I'm going to actually just read the book synopsis because it's pretty short, and that will give us a good summary without any spoilers. All across the nation they ride, spreading fear and violence among the vulnerable. They plan to bring hell to earth, but even Ku Kluxes can die. Standing in their way is Marcy Boudreau and her fellow resistance fighters, a foul-mouthed sharpshooter and a Harlem Hellfighter. Armed with blade, bullet, and bomb, they hunt their hunters and send the clan's demons straight to hell. But something awful's brewing in Macon, and the war on hell is about to heat up. Can Marcy stop the clan before it ends the world? Dun, dun, dun. Now that we're grounded with the synopsis, okay, let me give a little bit of background on Djèlí Clark, because I always say Djèlí, it's not, it's Jelly. That's the wrong pronunciation I have been saying. I'm so sorry. Mr. Clark, I love you so much. Don't get mad. Okay, so this is from his website. I just condensed it a little bit. So Djèlí Clark is an award-winning Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, and World Fantasy nominated author of A Master of Jinn, A Benny Song, and novellas like Ring Shout and The Dead Cat Tail Assassins. His short fictions appear in Tor.com, Lightspeed, Apex, and anthologies such as Griots and Clockwork Cairo. A founding member of Faya Literary Magazine, he also contributes reviews to Strange Horizons. Born in New York and raised in Houston, he spent formative years in Trinidad and Tobago. When not writing speculative fiction, Clark works as a historian, specializing in Atlantic slavery and emancipation. He blends history with fantasy, writing on topics from Lovecraftian racism to critiques of Black Empire, and frequently speaks at genre events. He now lives in a New England Edwardian castle with his wife, daughters, and a dragon-like Boston Terrier. Occasionally, he muses on speculative fiction, politics, and diversity on his blog, The Disgruntled Haradrim.
Thanks, Joey. That is an amazing summary of who this author is. And I had just one little tidbit that I found in my research about him is that he was born in 1971, which happens to be one of my favorite years for human beings to be born here. His a name before he changed to his pen name is Dexter Gabriel. So he has gone through his own transformation. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I appreciate he has embraced this new identity and this new life up in New England, which I did not know. I was really thinking he was still rooted in the South.
No, I did not know that that was not his real name. I just thought he had a really cool name, and he has two cool names. So I don't know why he changed it, because that's still a cool name, but to each
And Joey, one little caveat, what do we always say? AI helped me figure this out. So this could be a complete hallucination. So I will double check that. But I was like, sounded right to me.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Authors have pen names. Look at George Eliot. Her real name wasn't George, it was Mary. It happens. Okay, so now you could tell us what your initial impressions are of Ring Shout.
Joey, I was so excited to read this because you have mentioned this author and this book in particular to me on multiple occasions. Like, yeah, we'll get to it. It was better than I expected because I didn't know exactly what to expect. You didn't really give me any context. You're like, it's a great book, just read it. He shoots us out of the story like a cannon because it mentions in the first line, in the first paragraph, it's July 4th, and she's asking, has anyone ever gone to a Ku Klux Klan rally? No, actually, I can't recall that being part of my experience. It was such an interesting combination of fantasy, actual events that happened in U.S. history, this magical set of rules that were imposed on the society, and these really compelling characters, so beautifully written. And I know this is a novella, and we normally don't review novels because there's a lot to cover in a short period of time. As you had mentioned to me, there's a little bit of something for everyone. So even if you think horror, fantasy, racism, female rights, strong characters, that's not for me, there's something in there that will be for you. So I just loved every experience of this book. I listened to it driving through Virginia, so I had a little bit of Southern flair there. And I reread it this afternoon just to bask in how good it is.
Yeah.
How about you?
This is my second time reading it. I actually read it right about this time of year in 2020. That was my first time. A booktuber was like, oh, this is the perfect novella. And so I read it and I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I obviously love it because I suggested we should read this. And I have actually read all of his books except for he has a sequel to a middle grade series, A Benny Song. And I've read the first one, but it's really not for me. I'm not the age demographic, and that's okay. It's for children, so that's all right. But everything else I love and I've read. I think this is the book that I've recommended the most to people, and people have a very similar experience as what you have, Jennifer, in that they see the cover, which I'll show again just to refresh anybody's memory here. They see this is obviously the Ku Klux Klan, but there's two mouths where eyes are, and then there's black hands. So what's going on here? Obviously, it reads very horrific on the cover. So if you're not a horror fan, this is not something that would naturally appeal to you if you judge books by their covers. So hopefully you don't. Everyone that I have recommended this to has a similar experience to you as well, where they're like, oh my God, this is so good. Like, I love everything about this book. I did not expect to love this, but I did. So I'm glad that you also loved it, because now you can be added to that list of people that have said that. And this really shows how great of a writer P. Djèlí Clark is, because this is 181 pages, at least in that edition that I just showed, which is probably the edition that most people have, unless it's an ebook. He manages to pack such emotion and nuance. And there's so many complex conversations being had in this book, and it's such a short amount of time. I mean, I've read huge books that cannot get even close to the craft that Clark is doing here. I think his academic background in history really shines in this book because it's so grounded in the era that he's writing in. Of course, he knows everything there is to know probably about this part of history. And I'll just say that my only critique of this novella is that I wish it was longer, because I absolutely love it. And I want to get to know these characters so much better. I want to know Marcy, Chef, and Sadie. And I just want to get to know everybody a lot more. Obviously, there's only so many pages. We can't know them that well. I want to know the relationship of how that started with Michael George and Marcy. It's a fantastic book. Everyone should read it. And that's it. That's my whole spiel.
That is great, Joey. And I think one of the things we failed to mention is that this was set in 1922. One of the elements of the story is that things sort of go in a weird timeline. They have one of the aunties who is this spiritual haint. She's in and out of time. So she is experiencing multiple timelines and multiple futures and past all at one time. In this book, there's a pivotal scene where they say, I am coming from 1922, but knowing you did something in the 30s, I know about it because I have this other horizon. The history that was put in 1922 about what was happening both in the United States and the foundation of the KKK that we would know traditionally as a hate group in the United States. We get to learn a little bit about their history, that it started originally after the Civil War. So we have some flashbacks to the Civil War time and projections into the future of what the world can be if we eliminate this source of hate. And I just thought it was so well done. And as we were talking about the Red Dirt Witch last week, we are faced with these very, very tough topics that are not being handled indelicately. There is no preaching. Here is a story. We're going to let you as the reader decide what you want to take away from the morality of what the characters are doing. And Joey, to your hope that this could be longer, I think that the author left us with a little bit of a cliffhanger of Maurice. She has the sword. She talks to the ants about, what her future will hold. And she's like, well, why aren't the white spirits embodied into the power of the sword? And they're like, oh, that's a whole nother sword. I'm like, aha, you are setting us up for another rendition of the story from another person's perspective. So that was something that I was like, would you please write us this book? I really want to see this other perspective. So I think it was very compelling, but not overdone. When we ask ourselves the question, who is this story for? It could be for almost anyone who wants to read something fast-paced, something a little bit out of this world, but also very much grounded in real topics that we discuss quite often here on Extra Literary Affairs.
I agree. This book that has mass appeal, I think that's why it's been so popular, especially now because that movie came out called Sinners with Michael B. Jordan. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to wait till it comes out on streaming. I believe it takes place probably in this era, and it has to do with vampires instead of monsters. Yes, vampires are monsters. You touched on something that is so important to this story, which is hate. Because obviously, as you said, we are aware that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, maybe if you're not from the United States, you wouldn't know that. I don't think that's a widespread thing or a global group. It's just the United States, probably.
We don't want them exporting that hate to any other location.
It's unfortunate that they're here at all. That sucks for us. I think that is such an important part of this story because that is what the Ku Klux is. And in this case, if you have not read the book, that is when a Ku Klux Klan member turns into one of the monsters they are referred to as a Ku Klux. There's an exploration of how hate comes into this story and why it's so important. We know that they're consuming hate, basically. But I'm going to have to spoil it. We're spoiling this whole thing. Obviously, don't listen to our analysis if you don't want to, all the spoilers. As we learn throughout the book, we're trying to figure out where Ku Klux is coming from. How are these people who are regular human beings turning into these monsters known as Ku Klux? There are some efforts to try and figure that out. Molly is one of the characters in this story, and she is, I believe, of German descent. She is trying to do some sciencey stuff to figure it out. Marcy is trying to explain to us, the reader, because she is a protagonist and it's from her perspective, how this may be happening. This is on page 49, in case anybody is reading from that edition that I showed. She says, that's science talk for how Klan folk turn Ku Klux. Molly says it's like an infection or a parasite. It feed on hate. She says chemicals in the body change when you hate strong. When the infection meets that hate, it starts growing until it's powerful enough to turn the person Ku Klux. As for me, it's plain evil them clans let in, eating them up until they hollow inside, leave behind bone-white demons who don't remember they was men. So initially, the idea is that it is a complacency that is fueling the transformation in these people, in these Ku Klux Klan members. Because they're inviting hate in and they're consuming it, it is becoming a physical manifestation in them and it is transforming them. I will stop there because I have more to say about this, but I'm curious as to what you felt, how hate played into this story.
So they were feeding on hate, but they were also feeding on flesh. That was a part of the story that was also this horrific rendition of, we did see the scientific where Molly's watching these characters, watching these monsters evolve, and they're evolving really fast. They actually reference Darwinism and evolution. And so there's a lot of facts put into this story that is also fantasy. And they were very clear on trying to figure out why hate was growing so much at that time. It seemed there was a steady state, and then all of a sudden things got really ramped up. And that's when we hear about Butcher Clyde. He has his butcher shop, which caters only to white clientele. There are Klansmen in their white robes. For people who are not familiar with it, there is an organization. It's called the Ku Klux Klan. It has 3 names. And in the story, they say Ku Klux are the monsters who have turned from Klan members. So it was a little bit confusing because the protagonist in the story is just laying it on the table. She is really using language that was a little difficult for me about racism in America. I agree that this whole story was about hate because, spoiler alert, as we would say, at the end, when someone is given the opportunity to make a choice to double down on their hate and say, you guys have it coming, you have repressed us, you have beaten us, you have enslaved us, you have done all of these horrible things in our society, we are going to let loose. It is our turn to get all of the power and let loose. There was a moment that sort of this spiritual awakening of all of the people in her past and her community said, we're not showing up for that. We are showing up for love and compassion and care. And in my mind, I could hear my grandmother saying, any fool can hate. It takes a special person to love, but any fool can just throw hate out there all day long. And I really appreciated the author allowing us to get all the way to the end of the story to figure out if the main character of Maurice, if she is going to go for the power, live on hate, or if she is going to transcend that. And I just really think he handled that beautifully.
Yes, they're actually consuming the Grand Cyclops flesh. Eventually, we learn that that is what is turning them into. But there is still a complacency here. In the story, it's not metaphorical, but we can use it as a metaphor to say that people are complicit in engaging and consuming racist media or rhetoric. They have to be willingly consuming all of these things to help perpetuate racism. And so I think what was so beautifully done that Clark does is showing that hatred, and specifically racism, spreads like a cancer. It's destructive and it's degenerative, and it will break these Ku Klux members down, and it will transform them into a monster, somebody that is devoid of all of emotion and humanity. They're no longer the person that they thought they were. There's one conversation, and it's a little bit longer, but I think it's so integral to this entire story. I want to read it because I think the whole story balances on this part of the conversation between Butcher Clyde, who is sort of the leader of the Ku Klux Klan in this case, and is the monster that is helping bring in the Grand Cyclops to help.
He feels like middle management,
Yeah.
Joey. He's like a middle management guy. He was like, I'm not the top person, but I'm not these guys that I'm turning either. And I just thought that was also interesting.
Yeah. I think this conversation will also highlight how racism is affecting Black people in this case. Obviously, P. Djèlí Clark is Black, so he's writing from a lived experience that either of us do not have. So again, we say this all the time. Reading and literature is also meant to help us gain empathy for people that do not have the same lived experience as us. And I think reading this section really highlights how can hate be categorized differently and what are its uses? Is it misinterpreted? So I'll just read it from pages 147 and 148. And this is, again, part of a conversation between Butcher Clyde and Marcy. So it starts out with Butcher Clyde. Look at all the delightful hate. We didn't put it there. Was always growing inside. Just gave it a nudge to help it blossom. A few feels of celluloid, and they come to us whole and willing. But sustaining as that hate is, it's not very ... potent. This is for Reese now. I raise an eyebrow. Seems these clans can hate well enough. You see, the hate they give is senseless. They already got power. They hate those over they got control, who don't really pose a threat to them. Deep down they know that. Make their hate like watered down whiskey. Now your people, his eyes light up and he steps closer. Y'all got a reason to hate. All the wrong's been done to you and yours. A people who've been whipped and beaten, hunted and hounded, suffered so grievously at their hands. You have every reason to despise them, to loathe them for centuries of deprivations. That hate would be so pure, so sure and righteous, so strong. And then a few pages later, this is also important. This is Maurice's response to Butcher Clyde's accusation of if she's a hateful person, which is on page 155. Not just me, all of us. Okay, content warning, is going to be some racist language and antiquated language that I will be reading, but not because I don't speak like this. Just be aware if you don't want to hear it. Not just me, all of us colored folk everywhere who carry our wounds with us, sometimes open for all to see, but always so much more buried and hidden deep. I remember the songs that come with all those visions, songs full of heart, songs of sadness and tears, songs pulsing with pain, a righteous anger and cry for justice, but not hate. They ain't the same thing, never was. These monsters want to pervert that, turn it to their own ends, because that's what they do. Twist you all up so that you forget yourself, make you into something like them. Only I can't forget because all those memories always with me, showing me the way.
Joey, I'm glad you took us there because that is bringing up so many other aspects of the story about the musicality that is in there, the importance of the oral tradition and storytelling through both songs and the folk tales that her brother had bequeathed that book to her, and the senselessness. I love that when you originally took us to that final scene when they're on the top of the mountain and they are having this epic battle, this battle royale. Everything is happening up here. We're reminded that The Birth of the Nation is a silent film that came out, complete white supremacist hate propaganda in 1915, it came out as a silent film. And so they're at the top of this mountain. And instead of having the orchestration or having anything narrating this, it's Butcher Clyde riling up the troops. It's a big rally, and he's just letting everybody know how horrible conditions are and how, they are the answer. And they said that that film conjured a spell. The people who watched it, they were primed for hate. They were primed for a quote unquote answer, right? They had their own prejudice and their own assumptions about what the world was like, and they were just soaking it in. There was some sort of magic charming that happened with them. It wasn't with the words. Obviously, there were no words. It's a silent film, but the images were implanting in these people and very quickly turning them into Klans members who then were able to be Ku Klux monsters. The reason that I wanted to just take us back to that is love wins, right? Forgiveness wins. I just thought that was such a beautiful way to end that story. Again, we are spoiling this for people who have not read it, so apologies. The book is so rich, there will be so many things for you to get out of, even if we tell you a few things at the end. Like, she's reunited in spirit, at least, with two people important to her who had passed on. And so she gets a brief interlude with them. And then they go back to the third level of the world. They said there's the here, there's the above, and there's the below. And so they go back to wherever they're existing in another plane. And the people that she really loves, who are in the here and now, are revived from this battle, and she can move forward in her life. So again, it was that decision to trust her own self and to have her own self-discovery. She had a horrific thing happen to her when she was 18. A little part of her got frozen at 18. That was her subconscious ticking at her saying, fight, 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 kill, kill, kill. She's like, I liked killing. I was great. I had a magic sword. I was top of my game. I am a amazing killer, and I am so righteous, and they deserve it so much, and I have so much anger, and I am just great at my job. And then she has this epiphany of, wait, I'm a little too close to the other side. I'm just a nice edge, right, from turning into something that is not pure and it is not what she wants to be. And so I was just glad that he was able to tie that up so nicely and so authentically for us in that story.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what that conversation I had read was explaining Maurice was motivated by hate. I think she had to come to terms with what is really motivating her and what is the correct way of channeling her emotion. Because I think one line from that, a righteous anger and cry for justice, because obviously she is the chosen one, which is a fantasy trope that is in a lot of fantasy stories. It's a recognizable thing. You understand what's supposed to happen to Maurice here, but they don't understand her thinking and her history and the tradition that she's enmeshed in her surroundings. And so it's misconstrued as hate, when she has to come to realize that, no, it's not hate, it's righteous anger. And there's another story that we read that said righteous specifically. I don't remember what it is now, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Don't refer to something you can't remember. Because that is such a beautiful way of explaining what she's feeling, righteous anger and a cry for justice, because she is justified in feeling angry. Klans members came and massacred her family and the community and Black bodies around her at all times. They're facing Jim Crow laws and segregation and all of these horrific things that are happening to Black people in the United States at this moment. And so she is completely justified, and so is everybody else in her community, for that anger towards the Ku Klux Klan and the majority white society at this point. And it's a cry for justice. She's trying to stand up for herself and for the people in her community and say, like, no, we cannot be massacred. You will not just kill us and or write it off and walk away. We are going to fight back. And so that one line really is so important to me in this story. That really summarizes what is the point of all of this? Why are they hunting Ku Klux Klan members?
Just as you were saying that, it reminded me of one of the conversations they had. One of the lines was, all the time, God is good. Not being a religious person, I thought this is a viewpoint of, even when atrocities are happening to a community, to a person, to a family, all of that, that there is an overriding faith that they're still being protected. Things could be worse, that God will find an answer for them in the end. And I know last week we talked about layers of a story. If we took out some of these speculative fiction and horror elements, would the story still hold together? 100% yes. As you know, the fantasy realm is not always my forte. I'm starting to understand more of the vernacular and the tropes that go along with that, but I'm still very much a newbie. But I do understand history. I understand this character development, this self-understanding that each of the characters come through their experiences. He sets us out with these three incredibly strong female characters, which were the monster hunters. They had a very clear mission and they had very different perspectives. As you said, one uses a blade, one uses a bomb, one uses a knife. They had three very different experiences, different ages. They were lovely. I loved the interactions between them and their community. I felt that they were really believable. And if they weren't hunting monsters, if they were really just running bootleg whiskey and Mama's Water, this magical potion that has been made, which feels very moonshiny to me, whatever we want to call it, those stories were completely believable. To me, these are women in the 1920s who were trying to make their way as single women in the world, finding love, finding adventure, finding self-worth. All of these things were present in this story if you strip away the other layers. So I think for people who love the other layers added on, that's great. But for me, I could strip those back and want to know more about what happened in Tulsa. Well, for some of us, we know that there was a very thriving Black community in Tulsa, which was basically burnt to the ground by the white society who just couldn't abide. They just could not. It wasn't for them. And the fact that he is a historian, as you said, he studies history, all of these little details are sprinkled in there. And I think a person could spend many, many hours Googling all of these events and have a much clearer, richer, and perhaps more honest discussion about where we were 100 some years ago and where we might be now, and compare and contrast how much progress we have or have not made.
Yeah. I think it's undeniable that Clark's historian background plays a big role in this. I think a lot of his works, he is very good at grounding the reader into the surrounding and the era that he is writing in. I don't think a lot of authors can do as well because you have to do research and stuff. I'm just saying, he already knows how to do it.
Thank you for saying that, because in reading the afterword, he talks about all of the experiences, all of the people. He even references Zora Neale Hurston. It's like people who were recording these folk tales, who were putting these traditions down so others could access them. In this novella, he gives us little snippets. They called them transliteration. They were transcribing this particular cultural group's oral tradition. And I just loved that. For me, harkens back to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, where she also has this historical perspective. She puts in these little diary entries and they date them in a very specific way. You get a voice of a living person in that time as you're looking at it at a different time period. And I was so excited he shouts out Beyonce and he shouts out a lot of different things in his afterword. As you said, yes, he is a historian, but I think he is a person of this time and had such a curiosity and an open-mindedness to make this kaleidoscope of experiences so accessible to people. I think there were so many influences that comes out when they show us the community and how all of these people are working in harmony. Each has their own place in the story. And I think if one of the characters was missing, the story would have been a little flat, right? He needed all of that diversity.
I do want to go back because there's one little detail in this story that you brought up in mentioning Butcher Clyde's butcher shop. It's also sort of a restaurant, and that's where he feeds the Grand Cyclops flesh. But there's a sign that's outside that Maurice sees when she's walking in that I immediately was like, oh my God, like this is such an interesting little detail that Clark puts in here. It did not need to be there. So the way that he wrote it, let me stop beating around the bush. So the sign says, and this is on page 79, wholesome food for the moral white family. So first of all, this sign could work still as wholesome food for the white family, but that's not what Clark writes. He obviously adds moral into that. We have to think, why did Butcher Clyde do this? But obviously Clark is the one who is writing it. It was so interesting to me that he adds morality into this. We were talking about last week with the Red Dirt Witch. N.K. Jemisin sort of takes morality out. It feels like she is not inserting her own morality into the story. At least it did for me. I won't speak for anyone else. Whereas what you said about this story, where obviously I think most people who are going to read this probably are going to side with the side of good, which is Maurice and Chef and Sadie and Nana Jean and all of the other characters. And obviously understand that the Ku Klux Klan is evil. And if you're reading it the verse. I don't know why you're reading that book, but you should read that book. For whatever reason, I've been thinking a lot about morality lately. How do we change people's minds when they think they are morally superior? So we would have to assume that Butcher Clyde has nefarious intent, obviously. But we have to assume that the patrons of the butcher shop who are there eating and buying meats also think themselves morally superior to the Black community that they're not living around because they live in different areas, but they may be interacting with in some capacity. So it made me think, well, how do you change someone's mind when they think they have the moral high ground, that they're doing this? And Butcher Clyde makes an argument that reasons why the Ku Klux Klan is doing what they're doing, killing Black people and attacking their businesses and burning them down, similar to what you're saying with Tulsa and many other places. It's not like it was an isolated incident. They feel morally justified. They are doing this because it's almost like it's their duty to do this. So I think that Clark puts that in there specifically, and it's just in that one spot. It doesn't come up again. The sign, she reads it and she moves on. So if you're not paying attention or if you're not reading closely, it's probably just a sign it's racist, moving on. But I think because he adds that morality piece to it, he's trying to get us to contemplate and really explore why are the Ku Klux Klan, if we take the monstrosity away from it, what is really their motivation? I mean, other than trying to exterminate Black people, of course, or people of color in general.
Right, I'm glad you took us to that part because one of the explanations comes with the passage that you read previously where Butcher Clyde is talking to her about power, right? It's this power structure. And there's a spot where I believe it was Emma who said she was very much into socialism and she wanted to perpetuate. She's like, you have no idea how things are in Europe. So there was this whole other side plot about talking about political upheaval in Europe. But her point was sharecroppers and poor white impoverished people were on pretty much the same power base as the African American community, and that in her worldview, if we could just educate this group of people that we don't have to be against each other racially, we need to be against each other with the power structure of government, of capitalism. Like that was her bent, right? She had this whole socialist thing going on. I think it was Chef who said, if you go to these Klan rallies, it is the poor sharecroppers. It is all of these people who are not living their highest and best lives, who at least have a cause. So when you said, why was that moral piece in here? I've often been curious about why people have such strong racial views. What's that literally about? And I think if you put that overlay of morality, it's like, oh, these people are less than. We have to have some power structure. Totally ridiculous, but I get that's how the world has worked previously. And even in talking about killing the monsters, I keep calling him middle management. Butcher Clyde actually talks about that. He was like, oh, everyone under me, they're senseless dogs. They're just following along. They're not in charge. He's, well, who is in charge? And it's like Gilsey. It's this grand cyclops. I just really appreciated the subtle calling out of why do we believe in hierarchy? Who are we following? Why? What are the consequences of that? And I remember as a little girl, now back in the 70s, way before you were born, very, very late at night, I remember watching a movie that I was not supposed to watch on TV because we didn't have VCRs then because I'm that old. And there was a scene from a KKK initiation. Now, I am 6, 7, 8 years old. I watched this and I remember watching that movie on commercial TV and being so scarred by that. And that whole incident, they were talking that it was the white man's duty to protect his wife and God and country. That in the Bible, there's some reference to darker skinned people as being less than, and that was their explanation for why they could do what they were doing. So when you ask, why does he just slip that word moral in there? It could have just been wholesome. He could have used any physical body term, but he used a concept of morality. I'm glad that you took us there because that could slip out of our thoughts, kind of like a little sheet of paper. He just sticks it in and sees if you're going to take the bait. And if not, he'll just slip another little sheet of paper in there 30 pages later and see if you are paying attention.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up the religious aspect of this too, because religion is blended into this story as well. And I think we can also see along with hate and how it's misconstrued with Maurice in Righteous Anger and all of that, I think we can see how the different characters use religion. Of course, we have Nana Jean, who uses Christianity and then the magical tradition from her Gullah culture, which a shout out to Gullah Gullah Island. If anyone remembers that show, I loved that show when I was a kid, and I'm sure a lot of people my age also love that show. So that's my experience with Gullah. But I think that it's so interesting how Butcher Clyde tries to use Christianity or religion. Like maybe I shouldn't label it Christianity, but that's what it is. To justify hate. And so we have the morality aspect. This is a justification. As a white person, you're morally superior to black people. So that means that you're okay. You have the go ahead, the green light to continue doing what you're doing. He also uses religion. And so there is this one little section as he's burning Frenchie's bar into the ground. Butcher Clyde is outside standing with a Bible in his hand and giving a sermon to the Ku Klux Klan members. So he says on page 96, "Brethren, we must do our best to stamp out the vices in our midst. Fornication, drinking, heathen music. It's left to us to correct the waywardness of these simple minds, as a father must govern over his children in home, delivering stripes unto the wicked, so that they might be persuaded to follow a straight path." So again, we can see all of these aspects they're using to justify their hatred in systemic racism. Again, I said with the red dirt, which this should be required reading for high school kids, obviously a different story, but this is a good one for high school kids. How do we identify those things? Because in the end, a little white girl who was at the butcher shop, when Maurice sees a sign, she goes in to confront Butcher Clyde originally. The little girl is stopped from eating because her and her mom are appalled that Maurice has the audacity as a black woman to come into this whites-only space. So at the end on page 175, it says, "The little white girl from Butcher Clyde's didn't end up eating any of the meat when Maurice was there, but now she can see the monsters." So I think this is maybe not the answer, because what is the answer to racism? It's education, in my opinion. Again, this is a very nuanced conversation. I don't think Clark is saying, read this book and then this will end racism or anything. We can see it sends out a bit of a hopeful message that the white people of this area can start to see racism, that white people can see racism in the end if they are willing, if they don't want to or if they're not willing to consume all of this hatred. They do have the capacity to be anti-racist and see that, oh, this is atrocious. This does not have to happen. And so we can see like there's a new generation of children that could be raised to not engage with this.
When they were at the top of the mountain, we are shown this child and her mother who did not consume the flesh at the butcher shop because they were like, oh no, a black person was in here. We got to get out of here. We just can't be in this space, which is totally ridiculous, but I get it. It is the unlearning, because many of these people watching, they were infected literally inside of their bodies. They consumed something in their mouths that was then in them, that had them worshiping this grand cyclops, literally melding their lives into this larger organism. We saw that at the top of the mountain. They all seemed possessed. They said they were enchanted in some way by this hatred. Clark did a really great job of saying, if you snap somebody out of that spell, they will look around themselves and go, are you kidding me? Racism is so dumb, right? And I want to go back to something that he slips in. I loved it so much. Sadie is a woman who has an African-American mother and a white father. And so they call her a high yellow girl in this story. She is getting schooled by a gentleman that she finds fascinating, Leonard, who is talking to her about the ancient history when the black people ruled the world. And she's like, what actually are you talking about? There is no universe in which black people have had power. He's like, well, if you go back far enough in history, and they come to the conclusion, and I love that she did this and she used this several times throughout the story, that we are all literally the same people. We came from the same biological source. And she's like, well, how come you have a different skin hue than I do? And they had all of these theories like, well, it's because you're always scared, right? White people are white because they're very scared. They just lose it. Or they're very cold. Or they're albinos. And Sadie, who does not have a good education, she was not an educated woman, was going around and she's like, that is why white people need to know that we're all the same on the inside. And why would they punish us? She said it so much better than I did. Joey, you know the passage I'm talking about where she talks about, is that why white people are so mean to African Americans? Because they realize actually we're all the same. I'm not explaining this well.
I
Maybe we
don't
have to read the
remember the
quote.
exact passage, so I'm sorry, I can't throw you a bone here.
No. So I'll try that again. So Sadie was told by Leonard that in ancient times, in the Egyptian times, the queens of Africa had all of this power. And Sadie's like, man, if I was born back then, maybe I could also be a queen wielding this power on the back of an elephant. And he even goes so far as to say they were talking about Darwin and about evolution. And she's like, I know that story. Molly, the scientist, told her about it. And there's a revelation that Sadie has. She's like, wait a minute. Why are there black and white people? Didn't we all come from the same source? We have this big biblical story. We all came from the same source. Why do we have different color skin? And there was a very poignant point where they said, well, white people are white because, you know, when you get cold, they get very light colored. Maybe they're albinos. Maybe they're always scared. Like you get blanched if you get a fright. And so Sadie keeps going around. She's like, you guys are just white versions of us. It was her acknowledgement of the humanity of all, that racism is such a ridiculous construct. And that was one of the things that she said right before she passed, that she was just very proud to just own it and entice people, right? With all that we know, why does racism persist? I think it's some of its tradition. And I think Clark called out very clearly in a couple of full of passages, many people want someone to look down on. So they just pick up someone, the others, and say, oh, I'm better than you because at least I'm not that. And Sadie's point was, is underneath all of this skin, we're all the same. And he reflected that in the monsters because he said certain people in the community can see the wavering, shivering. If you look at the monster from a certain angle, you're like, oh, that looks like a person, but I know there's a monster in there. And I think that was just that interesting looking beyond the surface with people who are sensitive enough to witness it, to see what's the truth of someone and their insides. Very long ramble, but there was a point there, Joey. I promise.
You got there.
I got there.
Yeah. I feel like I might have like a slightly different idea of what maybe the author was hoping, or at least what I walked away with after my second reading, because I read it 5 years ago. I can't really remember all the details. Is that the purpose of putting that little white girl in at the end that says like, oh my God, that's a monster. That's not a person. That's monster. Is to say the first step is being able to acknowledge that racism exists. And then this little girl now has to go and learn how to not be racist, how to be anti-racist. So at least in my perspective, I don't think that the message of this story or that part of the story was to say that skin color is just skin deep kind of thing. You have to actively educate yourself on how racism has affected the Black community for a very, very, very long time. And the only way to stop perpetuating it is to actively be anti-racist. But same conclusion, really. Stop being racist. Don't be racist, okay? That's it.
The more you know, the less you'll do it. That was the key to that. The more exposure, the more historical context, the more thought goes into it. You're like, that doesn't make any sense.
I agree with that. I think that is something everyone should take away. It's like, yeah, if I educate myself, education will solve a lot of problems in the world. When you know stuff, then you don't have to hate or fear it. Butcher Cly says the same thing. Part of this is perpetuated because there has to be a scapegoat or someone that we could say, I am better than you for whatever stupid reason. Butcher Clyde says that as well. And obviously Clark writes that in here, that that's part of the purpose of the Ku Klux Klan is to punch down, basically, even though, especially at this time, but in reality as well, that there is white privilege that exists in the world then and now. It's not at risk of being taken away at this very moment. Why hate a group of people that cannot take that power away from you? I think that's the point of what he was trying to get at in that monologue, was trying to provide context of why is racism perpetuated.
And Joey, I'm just going to take a super hard pivot in this moment because you reminded me of a portion of the book that in my mind came out of the blue, but it was so well done. So they had the night doctors. They are these creatures based on some historical fact about people doing experimentation and having people disappear from the African American community to be used as medical student cadavers. I love that he put it in there, historically accurate, I believe. In the early part of the story, we are introduced to Molly, who is a scientist at heart. And she says, please bring me back these specimens because I want to learn more about the physiology of these Ku Kluxes. She is talking about evolution. She's talking about pulling back the epidermis. There was this nice rollicking story. We're hearing all these adventures that these ladies are having, shooting monsters and finding moonshine and just doing all of this great stuff. Then abruptly, we have the scientific, she has a workspace, she's investigating, she's very scientifically minded. And Clark mentions, well, if you've ever met a scientist, you know they can really be this way. They can be really single-minded. Then we have that motif showing back up with the night doctors, because they were also doing dissection. They were also trying to find the truth. They were trying to understand the mechanism of how things worked. I just really love that he put those two scientific things in there to balance this story out. It wasn't just a love story. It wasn't an adventure story. It wasn't fighting racism. It had all of these other components. And we talk about the different layers of the story. I was fascinated about the idea of wanting to know, quote unquote, the truth, right? If you dissect something, you are theoretically trying to find out the origin of something. You're trying to make sense of the world around you. And I just thought it was interesting that in the physical world that was happening, and also in this strange, mythical, I don't even know what to call that realm, this not of the world realm, they were doing the same type of thing.
Yeah, there are so many elements to this story, even though it's only 181 pages. I feel like there's just a million things that we could talk about. I mean, we could talk about a short story that's like 4 pages, even shorter, and we could talk about that for hours.
We're at our time at this moment, and there's still so many other things to discuss. So wait, could I just really quickly run through a list of things that I think are in the novella that we may or may not have touched on, just as an enticement for others to perhaps pick up the novel and read through it on their own? Could we do that? Some of the things we've talked about and some of the things we have not. So there's racism as a manifestation of evil, right? It's an infective force. Ancestral power and resistance. Where do people get the motivation to continue on under these very difficult circumstances? The horror of propaganda and how hate gets passed down from the generations. Female strength and camaraderie. Those 3 women rocked it, right? We had Cordelia, who was called Chef, and we had Sadie, and we had Maurice. Amazing characters in and of themselves. The redemption and transformation of getting educated, of truly living out your values and rallying your community behind you. That's a big thing. I just really loved that. And then another thing that I had read about this piece, Afrocentrism and the magical elements of that culture and how important it was to the storyline. I think if we had removed the mythical pieces of folk lore, a lot would have been lost. And I'll just leave it at this. Loved it, loved it, loved it. That she had a book that her brother used to read to her, African folk tales. And in the end, she's able to reunite to her brother and hand the book back and say some new things have been written in this book. So I love it when an author calls out the power of reading and storytelling and then weaves that into the plot. So A++.
Good job. We'll also say that this author is really good at writing queer characters. Chef is obviously somewhere on the spectrum. Whether she's a lesbian, she's certainly a stud. He does a really great job at writing queer characters. All his books feel like they typically have a queer character in there somewhere, and they're always perfectly represented. So, chef's kiss to you.
Chef's kiss to Chef. And I do appreciate, Joey, that you said that. As a person who is still learning a lot about this was completely believable. It was a non-issue. What I am learning about people in their sexuality and the way in which they express themselves, it can be such a non-issue. It just is. And I think that is how these characters were integrated into the story. We were talking about sexuality. We were talking about gender identification. We were talking about how you want to serve your country. Chef went to war, but as she came back, they're like, you couldn't do it as yourself. You had to pretend. And again, it's those messages of, I want to be authentically me. And I want to live in a world that says, yeah, we're all welcome here. And I think he nailed it.
I'm going to add one more thing. As a homosexual myself, someone from the queer community, reading books where queerness is not just normalized, it's not even really brought up. Obviously, we know that Chef is dating women and is interested in women, whether she identifies as a woman. We know her pronouns are probably she, her, but it seems like probably somewhere on gender identity, she's probably a little fluid there. But anyway, to read a book that blends queerness in it so well, it's really just so normalized where it's just a part of the background. It doesn't make or break the book. It's such a refreshing thing to read as a queer person, because sometimes it's used as like a plot twist, like, oh, they were a lesbian, or it's usually trans people. Plot twist, they were trans. You're like, that's not a plot twist. That means nothing. It's a very refreshing thing, and it's a joy to read when stories are written like that. And Kay Jemison, who we just read, also does a very great job of that. So I really appreciate when authors are able to do it so well, and just, you're like, finally.
I totally agree with you, Joey. It was a delight to read this novella, and I am interested in reading more from Mr. Clark as he continues his literary career into the future.